Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining this evening's live stream. Cherry Willow, we have been doing a lot of exciting work, and so I'm excited to give you a few updates, some things that we've had going on between last year. So I hope everyone had a wonderful holiday season and their new year is off to a great start. Also really excited about today's guest, who I will bring on here shortly. And we also have another little guest with us today, my kitten Ace. Recently rescued him. And so it's been exciting to have him as part of our family and join our work at Cherry Willow as our unofficial mascot. So just to kick things off, we recently put out our first newsletter. Over the holiday, we celebrated a 1-year anniversary for Cherry Willow as a nonprofit, which was a really exciting milestone for our organization. In that time, we were able to establish over 50 partnerships with nonprofits and community-aligned organizations and help over 35 of those organizations create co-branded apparel collections to give their supporters, their volunteers, their donors another way to support that organization and also a way to represent that organization out in the community and tell the story of why the work that they do is so important. That's something that if you followed my story and Cherry Willow's story, every time I have an opportunity to speak, I always advocate for just getting involved in your local community. You know, at Cherry Willow, we're focused on homelessness and being able to address some of the misconceptions that exist about the people experiencing homelessness, while also working to empower them, helping them get connected with resources like housing, food, transportation, education, and healthcare. But we're partnered with so many wonderful nonprofits, and there's over 1.5 million nonprofits in this country. And I'm sure that you can find a cause that you are excited to support. And believe me, they will definitely take your support. Even if that's just an hour of your time, if you're able to donate, $5, $10 a month, those small actions add up to a large impact, especially when we have a community of people that are doing them. And so that's just some of the work that we've been doing. One other update, I've been very involved locally here in Aurora, Illinois at a warming center. So I'm working with them on a storytelling campaign and going to be bringing you interviews with some of the staff, with some of the volunteers to help you understand why they take the time out of their day and dedicate themselves to supporting the people experiencing homelessness in our community. And then we're also going to be able to interview some of the guests that want to share their story with us. And the goal is always to humanize the people that are impacted by homelessness. And again, focus on the systemic problem that it is. Homelessness is really about a lack of affordable housing. And while there are many paths that lead to homelessness, that is really the number one driver. And that is something that is outside of these people's control. 40 to 60% of people that experience homelessness are employed and work, and they're just not able to afford housing in their communities. And again, that's something that we need to affect policy change to bring about, the creation of more affordable housing. And the best way to do that is by helping the public and addressing that public perception change. Having affordable housing in your community is a benefit to your community. It lowers crime, it lowers the burden on emergency services, and there's so many upstream benefits of actually supporting people, providing them housing and a safe foundation that they can build from, and then surrounding them with services that they can take advantage of to actually, continue to stay housed and be positive contributors to their community. And that's something that, as I've worked in the nonprofit space, everyone that I've worked with has a really incredible story. And with all that said, I'm really excited to bring on today's guest. She is the co-founder of Adaptt Apparel, is a Canadian-based organization, and I'm really excited to welcome Katherine to the stream. I have a lot of great questions for her, but Katherine, I'd love to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself to our audience, and then share a little bit about your work at Adaptt Apparel. But thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Matt. This is an honor to be here. And yes, I am the co-founder of Adaptt Apparel. And we started about 2 years ago. And the story with Adaptt Apparel is I'm a caregiver for both my parents who have Alzheimer's and mobility challenges. And when my father was in his final stages, the nurses said to me, "Your father really needs adaptive clothing." And like most of us out there, I really had no idea what that was. So I started looking into it and realizing that there really wasn't much out there. And dignity was and always will be the forefront of our mission. So we're designing clothing that really speaks about, easy and accessible clothing, which, is clothing that still keeps dignity at the forefront. Since my father has passed, my mother now, I'm still a caregiver for her as well with Alzheimer's and mobility issues. And she wears our clothing very proudly. And so that's really how the Adaptt story began.
That's really cool, and I love that it came from just a personal experience and supporting a loved one. My grandfather also had Alzheimer's, and my grandmother had dementia. And like I was relatively young when I remember them going through that, but I didn't ever think to the extent of like how the clothing that they're wearing could be causing them more issues. So I was curious, like in the early days, what was the problem that you were most focused on solving, with the adaptive line?
Well, with especially my father's illness, he really had stiff joints. And as a caregiver, also, we're really concerned about hurting your loved one and trying to get the clothing on them. And like, I'm going to talk a lot about dignity, but, I would see other, patients in the long-term care home that were wearing adaptive clothing, but their bare back was showing. And so there was, really two things. I really wanted to have clothing that my father could wear proudly, and also that we could help him get dressed, still maintain a little bit of independence. As the disease progressed, that became less and less. But in the beginning, independence was a big, big issue. And we wanted to have that clothing. And when we felt that the clothing wasn't going on, with ease, that's where we started to see some behavior, because he was frustrated and communication skills started to decrease as well. I see that with my mother now. So any clothing that we put on her, we want to make sure that, it's not hurting her. So that was really, with ease and keeping dignity at the forefront. So those were the first couple things that that's why we really got into designing our clothing.
Yeah, and how did you transition from like just coming up with this idea to support your parents and realizing like this is actually something that I feel like we need to bring to a much wider audience? If you could walk me through what that journey was like, that's always a really interesting like tipping point.
Yeah. So I'll actually go back a little bit, Matt, because I think this is a key part of the story and my journey into Adaptt Apparel. Is 21 years I was a special education teacher. So I worked with high needs students with autism, Down syndrome. And so I really had a very good understanding of, sensory disorders or mobility issues with the students that I was teaching. And then transitioning into the caregiving piece of my parents. So it really kind of flowed naturally into it. It's a calling that I have, and it is something that I guess I've been working on for over 20 years.
Yeah. Well, that's really cool. And like, so when you first got into like the special education space, I'm always curious, like what inspired you to walk that path, and obviously that's led you to what you're doing today. But always really curious about, the origin of that's a really challenging line of work and can be very emotional. So what drew you to that?
Yeah, I guess I'm I'm drawn as a caregiver and an empath. And I've always, even today, I'll always fight for the underdog. And that's something that I've just been born with. I'm from a large family, a farming community, and family of six. We're just always looking after one another. And I think that's something I've just been blessed with. I have a passion for it, to care. Looking after the students, I always will cheer for those who it just doesn't come naturally for them. And now, when I left that, teaching was a beautiful profession. I was, able to have a large impact there as well. But I also knew that I had a larger calling, and the calling of now looking after my parents and the impact that Adaptt Apparel can make. I look at it as a global mission of how can we serve on a larger scale. And I think that's where I've been called to serve and have impact. And our mission is to make sure that this clothing is accessible to everyone, right?
Yeah.
Regardless of where you're at. The story, Matt, starts from long-term care, because that's where my parents are in Canada. Long-term care is a nursing home facility. And but when we launched, that's one piece of it. But now we are serving people who are going through cancer treatment with infusions with our clothing, dialysis, or knee hip joint replacements. So we really have two tiers to our Adaptt Apparel brand. We have the long-term care side, and we have the medical and rehab side as well. So right there, you can see we can have a large impact. We can just serve so many people. And like just off from the get-go, Matt, you said, my father had Alzheimer's, right? So
Yeah.
everyone, I look at it as a blessing, but at some time in your life, you probably will be called upon to be a caregiver for someone. And it's a blessing if you can see it that way.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think like for me, Cherry Willow actually comes from the two streets that I grew up on, where I first learned about service work. And so, my parents were primary caretakers of my grandparents as they aged, and moved in an assisted living facility. And then we were always very involved, like serving migrant workers in our community. My mother would make meals for St. Vincent de Paul. And so I feel like that's, that is ingrained in you from a young age, with showing up. And you've mentioned the term dignity a couple of different times, and that our first topic of the day is designing dignity through clothing. We seek to do that at Cherry Willow, to dignify people experiencing homelessness, because they are oftentimes some of the most misunderstood people. They are neglected. They're walked past hundreds, if not thousands of times every day. And that's why, like, one of our phrases that's actually really large on the back of the sweatshirt is humanize, not otherize. And I feel like, when we see someone that's struggling, it's often easier to like, oh, well, that's them. Like, it's their problem. Whereas like, no, that's us. That could be any of us. And like, how would you want to show up how would you want someone to show up if that was you in that situation? And so that's a lot of the work that we try to do with our apparel. But now yours is a lot more functional in terms of the needs that you support. So I'd love to learn a little bit more about how you balance that function, dignity, and style, with the adaptive apparel that you're creating.
Yeah, first of all, that's incredible work that you're doing at Cherry Willow, Matt. I love hearing the stories of mission-driven organizations. It's incredible work. So well done.
Thank you.
Yeah. So designing our clothing, what is really important, first of all, if you look at our clothing on our website, you'll see our logo. Our logo is actually my mother's thumbprint. So
Cool.
our design process is lived experience. So it's not just clothing that, I've come off the streets and I'm like, oh, I think someone who is going through knee or hip replacement, I'm going to start designing clothing. I've actually worked, and our team works with people who are going through need you like a joint replacement or going through cancer treatment, working with my parents and working with the residents in the long-term care facility, talking to the PSWs, talking to the nurses, the people that are front line. What can we do better? How can we design clothing that is going to make life a little bit easier? And it's really, really important, when we're designing this clothing, that we are listening and tweaking to make sure that we're getting it to where it is the best clothing that we are putting out there. And we're really proud of that. The quality of our clothing that we're putting out there is one of the first things people say. We are shocked at the quality. So it is, frontline in the trenches, speaking to the people who require or need the clothing, speaking to the people, the caregivers, the nurses, the doctors, everyone's involved. And I think that's what, makes Adaptt Apparel special.
Yeah, that's amazing. And that feedback approach, there's so much synergy between our work and your work, where similar to us, like we're developing ways to help people experiencing homelessness. And, a lot of other organizations, they will tell people like, hey, you have to do A, B, C, in order to get to D. But if this person's like, well, I only want help with D, I don't perceive I need A, B, and C, then maybe they don't take advantage of services. And so I love that you are working with the people that are on the ground, with the people that you're trying to support, and getting that feedback involved. And I'm curious, like, is there any particular feedback from your community that has most directly influenced the product decisions?
Well, when we're dealing with long-term care homes, a lot of the residents that are in that long-term care facility really require assisted dressing. So the clothing that we design for the residents in long-term care are open back type of dressing, right? Are, elastic waistbands. That type of clothing is specifically designed for long-term care. Our medical and rehab clothing is designed a little bit different. And it's designed specifically so that someone that is going through cancer treatment, and our clothing has a special type of, it's a heavier clothing. Often they're cold when they're going through their treatment, and dignity. They're not having to take off, their full sweater. They can sit there. I encourage all your listeners, to go onto the website and kind of get a look at what type of clothing is designed, but you'll see very distinct types of the clothing out there. I know with my parents, I know that the clothing that we designed for my mom, she has no overhead mobility and sits in a wheelchair. So how am I supposed to get, a shirt that I'm wearing on my mother? Not only does she have a cognitive impairment and steady decline, but she also has no mobility. Well, if I start pushing my mother's hands up over her head, I'm going to get some behavior, because that is the behavior is because she's in pain and can't communicate that. And all that experience goes back to my days of teaching with children with autism, right? Why do I have a behavior? Well, it's because they can't communicate to me the frustration. So let's get to the root cause and how can we do better for them?
That's amazing. And it's really cool that it's your work and your career leading up to this has kind of shaped how you've been able to support other loved ones. And that's something that I share about frequently, is a Japanese philosophy called Ikigai. I don't know, have you ever, you're familiar? Yeah.
Yes, I've heard of that. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was a lot of the ways of how I came up with Cherry Willow. And for those unfamiliar, it's the intersection of what you're good at, what you love to do, what the world needs, and what you can get paid for. And so it's a beautiful way, in a capitalist society that doesn't always value caretaking, that you can find a way to use your skills to help support people while still being able to support, yourself and your family financially. And so that's what I was able to do when I started Cherry Willow. I came from a marketing and branding background, and primarily in automotive industry, help them use apparel to have a consistent customer experience. And I saw that there was a large opportunity to use apparel and wanted to take it and advocate, for people experiencing homelessness due to a couple of loved ones that struggled with depression and bipolar disorder. And I saw how people that are navigating mental health challenges, how the system could fail them in a lot of ways, and how it could be really difficult to understand them if you don't try to put yourself in their shoes. And like for us, Cherry Willow is about showing up for people with unconditional love. And it seems like that's what you're doing, is you're providing a way to have dignity for people that can't communicate, but just through your professional integrity and observation, you've found a way to kind of navigate and break down some of those barriers. So that's really amazing that you were able to do that.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. And a big thing that I keep telling our people here and in the community is that Adaptt is mission driven, right? And when you have a mission over mercenary, right? Keeping the mission at the forefront. And sometimes I feel like, you're shaking your head, Matt, maybe because you agree, right? That you lose sight of why you started doing what you're doing. And then it becomes mercenary, right? But if we can keep the mission at the forefront, we can have such great impact. And I'm a true believer in that. And that is, service leadership and servant that we are called to do. And it's something that we become obsessed about, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that kind of really transitioned us nicely into the second topic for the show, which was caregiving as the catalyst for innovation. And so, like, obviously you've kind of shared about being that servant leader, loving your people and wanting to help navigate and solve some of their problems. So how do you stay connected to the people that your products are designed to serve as they go out there and use them?
Yeah, well, one of the things I do I'm the chair of my mother's long-term care home for the Family Board of Council. So, and I keep, telling when we meet at our board meetings that we are the voice, right, for our loved ones. So caregiving is something that I feel honored to be called to do. And the being a caregiver has allowed me and has given me the platform to be able to have this clothing line. And I think it goes a lot deeper than just a clothing. It's about looking after people and having that impact, and being called to care and look after one another, and be a voice.
Yeah, I think that's extremely well said. And again, it kind of ties into back to our work with homelessness, where the people that are experiencing homelessness often feel that they don't have a voice. They sometimes feel invisible because they're not looked after, they're not included, and especially when it comes to policy decisions. It can be very challenging for them to even go out and vote because they are so disenfranchised from these systems that have continually failed and let them down. And so that's where like my history as a caregiver, I learned a lot from my mother, and she was always caring for other people and just was very altruistic. And that's something that I was a young father, so having children at 22, I have 3 beautiful kids, and so that's a different version of a caregiver that I transitioned to at a really young age. But that inspired me in a lot of ways to live my values and be an example for my kids of how you can go out and kind of stay central to the mission. And I love using it as a catalyst for innovation, because that's what we're trying to do is, how do we get more people that are currently sitting on the sidelines to be able to step in and actually help make an impact positively on their communities, whether it's supporting an organization like ours or learning about Adaptt Apparel. I'm sure there's people out there that are viewing this that have loved ones that are navigating similar challenges to what your Adaptt Apparel solves. And so hopefully we can, help expose them to this work, and they can add some dignity back into the lives of their loved ones, or even introduce it to, senior living homes or other communities here in the U.S. And I know, I think right before the show, you recently said that you are currently expanding a little bit to Texas. I'd love if you could share with the people a little bit about that journey and how you got connected down there.
So we have a partnership with the Arthritis Foundation, and we just spent the month of December down in Texas, San Antonio, Austin, Dallas, Houston. So we serve and support anyone that is going, the challenges of arthritis. We also work very closely with the orthopedic surgeons. Anyone with arthritis often develops knee joint pain. So we have a very wonderful working relationship. We have some other exciting stuff going on right now that will expand our impact throughout the US, and that is very, very exciting. My husband is also part of our company. He actually lives and works in Texas. So
Oh,
I
cool.
live, yeah, we've got, when people ask, are you all in? We're all in. And this is something that is very much a family now. Even our 19-year-old daughter, and I'm going to swing back to that because I think you mentioned something important, Matt. But yeah, so we're down in Texas. We're just expanding down there. We've got some really great, exciting things happening. But just going back to the service, how can we show what it means to be a caregiver? I think, Matt, you really touched on it. Speaking about your three children, right? They see the work that you're doing, and naturally, we role model that. And we have a 19-year-old, and she's very much involved in the company and helping out when needed, going into long-term care homes, and visiting. And I think we need to show the next generation what it means to help and serve and be a caregiver. If we don't do that,
Yeah.
then how do they know? Like I said, my mom, farming community, and my mom raised 6 kids. She taught us what it means to give back and to help and be of impact, right? So I think, I think that is so important that we need to continue to do that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And like that was something I was really excited about. I shared the little kitten that we rescued.
Yeah.
It was my daughters really wanted to get a kitten, and I was like, okay, well, you have to understand the responsibilities that come along with it.
Hmm.
And my 9-year-old Madeline has just been incredible. Like she's changing the litter box 3 times a day without being asked, like feeding
Yep.
him, and I love to see that side of her come out because like she loves, she's empathetic and just loves on this little kitten so much. And so that's been really cool to see, and I hope that that's a part of her because she's seen how I'm going out in the community and what my parents have done. But that generational thing is really important. And then also like just with people that are seniors, there's a lot of loneliness that can happen, right? Like I'm sure if you're struggling to communicate, and now even in shelters, we're seeing a lot of people that, their Social Security and Medicaid isn't covering the cost of rent. And oftentimes, these shelters are 65 plus year olds that are having to live in them, where, they're having to go back to work and just in order to support themselves. And, if they don't have the younger generation that caretaker, like I think that's one of the things. I don't know about Canadian culture, but American culture is not always the best at revering our elders. Whereas like I think something about Hispanic culture that I
Hmm.
really admire is there's a lot of multi-generational homes, where the grandparents help to raise the young ones while the parents are maybe out spending more time earning for the family. And I think that's a great way to kind of have that. And I wish we had more of that here in the States. But I'd be curious about Canadian culture to see if it kind of parallels US or what how people go about caring for their loved ones as they age, in Canada.
Yeah, and I will, when we had to place our parents in a long-term care home, I will never judge anyone who has to make that really, really difficult decision, right? You're absolutely right. There are different, many cultures where you have generation after generation that live in the homes, right? And that's wonderful. But sometimes we just aren't able to do that because of safety
Yeah.
reasons. And that's what happened with our family. And there's we have to live with that guilt almost, because we had to place our parents in a long-term care home. And that's, if we could have kept them at home, which we tried, but it became, like I said, it was a major safety issue, especially on the farm. Going back to what you
Oh
touched
yeah.
on, Matt, about the loneliness, it is just, it's heartbreaking to watch. uh, I I guess, we're fortunate in my family. We're pretty much all hands on, and we have somebody that goes in pretty much every day to check on our mother. But our healthcare in Canada is really, it's very challenging. We have overworked and understaffed caregivers, nurses, doctors, PSWs, and what people really need to understand is that when you place a loved one in a long-term care home, it doesn't mean that your duty of caring is done. And we see
Right.
that a lot. And again, I don't want to judge, because everyone's life has seasons, and different seasons you can give differently, right? I'm fortunate now that I'm able to build this company and give, and I can go in and be with my mother. But there are seasons where, if you would have asked me 10 years ago to go in and help support and look after my mother in a long-term care home, I wouldn't have been able to give the time, right? So, but the loneliness and the depression in long-term care homes is rampant. It is absolutely heartbreaking. And when I go in, I'm blessed that I pretty much know all the residents that are my mom's in my mom's home, and it becomes a family, right? Helping and supporting and looking after not just my mother, but helping and supporting and looking after each and every resident in that home, because loneliness it's real.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's I remember that from my grandparents, and we were
Mhm.
fortunate that for a few years while they were in, it was more of an independent living facility. That we could go, and I still remember playing cards with my grandma and like
Mhm.
watching ESPN Classic with my grandfather while he had the heat turned up to 85 and was still wearing long johns and a sweater vest.
Yep.
um, but those are memories that I look back on fondly. And it's really cool to have been able to see them, and that's something that for my kids, like I'm really excited about, because since having kids so young, like my parents have been able to play more of an active role in my kids' lives,
Mhm.
which is really cool. And so,
Yeah.
hopefully as they continue to age, because my mother's been battling cancer for the
Mm.
last 19 years.
Wow.
So it's like
Wow.
we've always been able to like just appreciate all the time that we have with her. And you wouldn't know it, like she's still out giving out to others, she's still out involved in the service work, and so
That's
it's just really
incredible.
cool. And I think there's so much that we can learn from our elders, and just by showing up and like listening, they have incredible stories, and just
Mhm.
so much wisdom to give back.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that a lot of people struggle with, especially, and I speak of our 19-year-old, is when your loved one loses the words to communicate. Well, what do you go in there and speak to them about, right? It becomes a challenge. And I speak about this on my social media feeds, that, let your loved one know that they're loved just by a touch of a hand. And music is wonderful, very calming, very soothing, and memories. So pictures are a wonderful tool to calm and relax. So we encourage, to go in there with activities that can be helpful when you're visiting someone who can't communicate. And that just doesn't go for someone with, Alzheimer's or dementia. That's, it could be a traumatic brain injury, or could be someone who's nonverbal, right? So there's so many spectrums of people. But don't, because they can't communicate, or they may not remember that you have been there to visit, don't keep that from you going in there. You live in the
Yeah.
moment. Be with them in that time, right? And cherish those times, that you can still learn so much.
Yeah, I mean, presence is just very important, and being able to share your energy, and like, because you can still laugh, and they while they may
Yes,
not be able to understand context or different, like they can feel that still. And so yeah, showing up,
absolutely.
being present,
Yeah.
that's something that's really important.
Yeah, and
And so I
it doesn't have to be a long visit either, right? I always
yeah.
say it doesn't have to be hours and go, when when they've had a good meal and they're not tired, so fresh during, at the beginning of the day always works better. So, yeah.
Yeah. And so I'd love to kind of transition into our last topic of the day here, which is, building a purpose-driven brand that creates impact. Whenever I have an opportunity to speak to a founder, I know how challenging it has been to get Cherry Willow, off the ground and build something
Mhm,
from the ground up. So I was curious, like, what has been the hardest part of turning
mhm.
your mission-driven idea into a sustainable business?
I think the most challenging part, Matt, is adaptive clothing. Like 95% of the people, when you say that, really don't have a really good understanding of what that is. So the educational piece has probably been the greatest challenge. Um, just really educating our community on what Adapt is all about. So sometimes you have to slow down to go faster. And we realized that when we first launched, we came out really, really hard, but we have to build a really good foundation and brand awareness of who we are. And I think in the last, 8 months, we've really done a great job of that, of educating our community on adaptive clothing and what that is. That would probably be there's so many challenges out there as a um, new brand and new company, but that's the educational piece. We're not, coming out with new eyeglasses, or we're not coming out with the new just regular clothing, standard clothing. This is specific clothing for mobility. And so once we can get a greater understanding, and that's our challenge, but that's also our goal, is someday, hopefully, that when you walk into any retail store, you're going to be able to say, oh, my loved one cannot use her left or his left arm because of a stroke, so I can go into some retail and just pick up a top. That's our long-term goal, that we as a brand are educating our community, and we just hope to have that on a global level.
Yeah, I love that education is such a crucial component of the work that you're doing, and similarly with our work, education is
Mm,
huge, both in educating the public on the issues that lead people to become homeless, and then also trying to
yes,
help provide access to education for people experiencing homelessness, so they can empower themselves and kind of exit that situation. But yeah,
yes,
I love education as being integral, and apparel is a really cool way to kind of
yeah.
connect those dots.
Yeah, and we
Um,
think of, Adapt Apparel too, as it's not a fad, right? This is long. This is, your kids, our kids, right, are going to be able to have adaptive clothing that is readily available in every store. So this is a long journey. It's not a sprint, and some days we wish we could go a little bit faster so you can have that quicker impact, but I think I'm repeating myself, but building a really good foundation and I'm really proud of the foundation that we've built with Adapt. So, yeah.
yeah, yeah, and then I'd love to learn a little bit about you mentioned a few different organizations that you work with. How do partnerships and collaboration kind of expand the awareness and help you educate more people?
Well, I think the more, like, being on your platform, right, Matt? The more that we can get involved with different organizations and partner with larger organizations, it allows us to have that platform. So, here in Canada, partnering with the Arthritis Society as well allows us to do work with them. Um, in partnership, going into the US market and partnering with the Arthritis Foundation. And another big partnership that's coming that, I can't say right now, but we're right there, is going to be a massively beneficial to us as a brand. So, when someone says, will you jump on a podcast? Of course I'll jump on a podcast, because that means that we can have impact in a greater level, right?
Yeah.
We're just, I think you have to, we live and breathe mission driven and the impact that we're having. So we're always looking to collaborate and work with those people who want to make change.
Yeah, I love that, and we're very much the same way. At Cherry Willow, and partnerships and collaborations are a large part of the
Mm-hmm.
work that we're doing, and it just helps to get in more audiences, right? And then people just become aware
Absolutely.
of these causes, that they maybe
Yeah.
didn't know existed, and like, holy smokes, I could have taken advantage of that, like for one of my loved ones. But one of the
Exactly.
things I'm curious for you is, as you continue to grow, how do you make sure that the mission continues to stay first? Because
Mm,
anytime you're talking about scaling, profitability becomes, a large portion of that. So how have you been
yeah.
able to kind of keep the mission first while you're growing and expanding?
Well, when we down as our team and have our meetings, your core values, when they're right on your wall and you can review those and go over them, and anytime something that comes across, our table and in front of us, and we think that that doesn't align with our core values of Adaptt Apparel, then we need to make sure that we don't just jump on something that is a quick and easy way to get ahead, that's not really going to be of service to the people in our communities. So I think it takes a community, and it takes everyone that is working with Adaptt to make sure that we stay true to our values, our morals, and our integrity is number one. And if it doesn't align with who we are, then unfortunately, I hope that we can continue as we grow, not to just to jump into something that is not going to be of service and impact to other people. So really staying true to our core values, integrity.
Yeah, yeah. And that's, yeah, it's always just interesting because when you look at business and like, social enterprise and wanting to do good, there's always this
Hmm.
catch-22 of like, well, the more money that we raise, the more good that we can do.
Yeah.
So it's like making sure that you strike that balance of always keeping the mission first.
Always. Yeah. I love mission over mercenary, right? It's,
Yeah,
but it is hard, because you're right. The more, capital that you have, then the greater impact and of service you can be. So it's that's, I guess, Matt, that really ties in, or I should say, the people that are in your circle that are, you're building this brand with, making sure that the 5 people that are sitting around your table have the same morals and ethics and integrity that align with your brand. And if they don't, then, I think then it's easy to be persuaded to go down a road that you're not going to be proud of. So just
yeah.
keeping your circle tight, and the people that are going to help you make those decisions to have impact are the right people.
Yeah, the culture is really important, and making sure that everyone is
Yeah.
aligned, and that's been extremely important for myself as we built out our team at Cherry Willow Apparel, that make sure that everyone's here, with the mission
Yeah.
first in mind. And obviously we're all working towards, being able to support ourselves and our families and be able to continue to grow and make more of an impact. But at the end of the day, we're trying to inspire more people to get involved and support the millions of people that need help across the country and across the world. um,
Right.
and so I'd love if you kind of shared a little bit about the vision for Adaptt Apparel, getting in and like being able to go to any retailer and
Hmm.
have the adaptive wear. So for somebody that's watching this, if is there anyone that would be a valuable connection, or, someone that they could introduce you to, maybe in the retail space, or how could they get involved if they want to help, bring Adaptt to their community?
Well, like I said, we're always open and to every conversation. I think you're one conversation away from changing the trajectory of your life, your loved one's life, the people in your community, right? So, if there's anyone that's listening to this, please reach out. You can find us on social media at Adaptt Apparel, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. Send us a quick email. But yeah, the goal and the vision. If I look at long-term care, if I had the perfect scenario, and if we could, I would love for every resident to have access to easy and accessible clothing. And maybe that means that upon intake, that they are gifted with an adaptive suit of some sort, or some piece of clothing that would make their welcome visit into their new home, because it is their home that they're transitioning into. How wonderful would that be, right?
Yeah.
That's a beautiful vision that I have. If someone that is going to have a cancer treatment, maybe that's the doctors that they're working with, or that is something that they would have the opportunity to have access to through some, because not everyone can afford it. So is there funding that's available? And then on a just keep growing in the retail space, that the education piece, where it's not, when you mention the word adaptive clothing, it's not, oh, let me Google that. It's like, I know what that is, I know where I can get it. So retail is once we get the educational piece down, then when you walk through the stores and you see adaptive clothing, you're going to know what it is.
Yeah, that's really amazing. And we actually have one of our partners, Tactus Music, that is in a similar adaptive clothing space, but they've created wearable technology that allows deaf people to experience music.
Ah.
So it's really cool to be partnered with other organizations that are using apparel as like a force for good and to increase accessibility. And I'm curious, like, how do you think adaptive fashion will evolve in the next decade?
Well, fashion is evolving. It's quick, right? There's lots of
Yeah,
trends, and like I said before, adaptive clothing is not a trend. This is something that's here for the long game, and we've seen other retails that have, other brands that have tried to tip their toe in it, and people always say, well, what's stopping, some other brand from copying your idea? Well, absolutely, right? Anybody can, but they don't have the mission and the story behind their brand. And that,
right.
and I'm very loud about our mission and the story of how Adaptt started. So it's like I just keep repeating myself. I think is with the education and staying consistent in the long-term game, the long game, that we're going to have everyone have access to it. So, but it's going to take a lot of you know education and pursuing this, and having the collaboration and support to make adaptive clothing accessible to everyone. And that's
Yeah.
inclusivity, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's really well said. And as we're getting towards the close of the show here, I always like to carve out the last few minutes to just ask like ways that you can reflect and maybe advice for some people that are trying to do similar things. So yeah, I'd love to know like what has building this brand taught you about resilience, and how you're bringing dignity to these people.
Well, resilience is, it's a strong word. And if you are, starting off and building a brand, uh, you're going to have the highs and the lows. There's been many all been rosy. But I have a very strong support. Like I said, it's, a family behind us that have, you know, um, are all in on it. And that, when I think of the people that we're helping, it just it keeps us going, right? It keeps the brand growing. And if without my time and being called to help my parents, I would have never ever had this opportunity. And when I you get down and you get frustrated with certain things, I always think, why are we doing what we're doing, and why am I here, right? And I know my father, who's no longer with us, he'd be extremely where we're going, and I keep them at the forefront. So we with our challenges, we just every hurdle we've been able to overcome, and the next hurdle we're going to be that much stronger, and we're going to be able to overcome that one. So every time you get a little bit stronger, and there's a reason why
Yeah.
I've been put into this situation, and I know this is happening to me and to our brand, and that we are in the right place, and at the right time we can have a really great impact. So I know I'm right where I need to be.
Yeah, that's amazing. And yeah, another question I had was, if someone wanted to start a mission-driven apparel brand today, what would you tell them to focus on first? Like I'll answer this one first, because I know at Cherry Willow, like we kind of both went down a similar path, and focusing on that education piece, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
understanding what is the goal of the brand, and making sure that that is prevalent first before you kind of like how do you then add apparel into that. So for us, like that was central. Like our message was around homelessness and the misperceptions, and there was a lot of different ways that we can educate, and then how do we incorporate that education into our apparel, so that we can have the most impact as a brand. But I would love
Yeah.
for to hear what you would answer that question.
Yeah, I guess if someone was looking at starting a mission-driven brand, what is the problem that you're trying to solve, right? So the
Yeah.
problem that we're trying to solve is to have easy and accessible clothing for anyone with any mobility or cognitive impairments. So that's the problem. And when you have a problem that you can help solve, you've got a mission. You've got to
Yeah.
you're off. Let's go, right? And I would also say that you know if you wait till you think you have to be 100% ready, you'll never start, because
Yep.
there is no perfect scenario. There is no perfect time. Just start. And build it as you go and figure it out. My favorite word is everything is figure outable.
Yeah.
And what's the worst that could happen? you know
Right.
so I just, yeah, like, just solve a problem and start before you're ready.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite phrases is action is the answer. Like
Yes.
ideas are great, and but they're never going to be fully fleshed out until you put them into action.
Yeah.
Because you may have
Yeah.
like this greatest idea, you may think you're solving this huge problem and this need, and then you approach the people that you're trying to help,
Yeah.
and like actually XYZ would be more helpful. And if you already put all
Yes.
this time, you can attach your ego to it, and then it can make it harder to change, to actually solve the need of the people that you set out to do. But that's where it's like when you take action and you ask for feedback and then you improve on that feedback, that's how you
Yes.
can really make sure you're staying aligned with the people that you've created your organization or your brand to serve.
Yeah, you hit on two of my favorite words too. Messy action is better than no action, right? So get in action. Talk is one thing, but you need to get in there and show what you're all about. So and then leave your ego at the door, right? Just leave it, because you've got to be able to handle the criticism that comes with it, and the feedback that of how you can do better. And if you can, just get into action and leave your ego at the door and keep your mission, you're gonna. And you touch on it too, Matt. Right? It's a long game. It's a long game. We're often
Mm-hmm.
put in. People want that instant, right? Like it's never quick enough.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I could go on and on about that.
Yeah.
But no, that's it. Those are good.
um, yeah, and then I'd love for you to share a little bit. Like this is something that I get asked a lot is, doing the work that we do and like serving the communities we serve. There's often a lot of emotionally heavy work. So how do
Mm.
you personally stay grounded, when you're trying to support people who really may be struggling?
Yeah, it's I've oh, I forgot to mention this part, Matt. After my teaching career, I opened and I still run to this day a health and wellness business. So my mental health is number one. You know, I'm a big walker. I'm a big exerciser. I love nature, and making sure that I'm feeding myself proper nutrition, and because it is emotionally exhausting. It's not physical, right? It's emotionally exhausting when you're serving people that are struggling and in an area. So really making sure that I'm looking after my mental health is number one, and I talk about that openly on my platforms of and people know that about me now, that if I am overloaded, my mornings are sacred time, and that is my time to really ground myself. Sleep is also very, very important. So exercise and sleep and nutrition, and just carving out that time so where I can be quiet, because it's very noisy out there.
Yeah, yeah, that self-care, is so crucial. And
Yeah.
similarly, like I do a lot of fitness as well, and like we do these cycling events where I'll do
Mm,
long distance cycling. Like so I did Sacramento to San Diego in July.
that's
We're
awesome.
planning another trip where I'll go from Jacksonville to Miami.
Wow.
And yeah, and like for me, cycling is my like safe space. It's my
Yes.
therapy. It's where I can just be in the moment. And
Yeah.
it's like that's because of what you said. The world is so noisy. There's so many things, but if you don't take care of yourself, it's like that expression. You can't pour from an empty cup. So we all have
Nope.
to make sure we're doing things that fill us up so we can pour into others.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that's my mental health. If I don't have that strong, then I'm no good to anyone, and I'm not going to have much impact. So, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, then the last question that I have for you here is actually, is there a question that you wish people asked you more often about Adaptt Apparel? And then like how can people get involved and support you in your work?
Yeah, I guess, I love it when people come up to me and say, your clothing was such a game changer for my loved one who was going through some type of medical. So I if you're, when people come up to and want to know about adaptive clothing, don't be shy to ask the question, right? So that's I hope that people continue to spread the word about adaptive clothing. I hope that people will continue to do their own research and find companies out there. It's a small market. Find companies that align with your vision and your moral and your integrity, and keep spreading the word. And like I said earlier, find us on social media, send us an email. I love receiving feedback, and yeah, that's just keep keep spreading and sharing it with those who, either yourself or someone that could use our clothing.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Catherine. It was a pleasure to meet you and to learn about the incredible work that you're doing. And I hope that there will be continued opportunities for us to collaborate together in the future.
Mm. Absolutely. I want to thank you, Matt, and Cherry Willow. What the incredible work that you're doing is just, it's amazing when we talked about collaboration earlier on, right? What we can learn
Yeah.
from one another. So I learned so much about the good work that you're doing. And I know you asked some wonderful questions. So I hope, like you said, we'll be able to work together in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And to everyone watching, thank you so much for the continued support. It seems like everyone loved the figure outable phrase, Catherine. So thank you for sharing that with our audience. And yeah, thank you for tuning in. So please, follow Catherine, follow Adaptive Apparel on social media, and then continue to follow our work. We did just send out our newsletter, as I mentioned earlier this week. So that'll be a way that you can stay in touch with us. And then we're also very active across all of our different social media platforms. And I'm really excited doing interviews with people, nonprofits. So if you do know of a nonprofit that would like to share their story, have them reach out. Would love to either host them on the show or meet up with them in person to interview them and help create content so that they can spread the awareness about the amazing work that they're doing. And hopefully we can together inspire more people to get involved, whether it's supporting Cherry Willow, whether it's supporting Adaptt Apparel, or any of the wonderful nonprofits that exist. So thank you so much, everyone, and I hope you have a wonderful evening.
Thanks, Matt.